It really is my pleasure to moderate and host and be the speaker, to introduce the speaker for this particular session. We're delighted that Silvia Perel-Levin will be our speaker today, particularly talking about her work and advocacy. Silvia is the chair of the NGO Committee on Ageing in Geneva and representative to the UN for the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. She is also a member of the steering groups of the Global Alliance on the Rights of Older People, GARAP, the Stakeholder Group on Ageing, and the Older Persons Partner Constituent Group of UN Habitat. Silvia has been working in the field of health and ageing and human rights for over 20 years at the WHO, the Union for the International Cancer Control, and a consultant to organisations such as the European Commission and the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. At WHO, she managed the first multi-country study on elder abuse, working with multiple partners, and produced, among other publications, the report Missing Voices of Older Persons on Elder Abuse. Before that, she was a TV, film and theatre producer, and that's highlighted a little bit by the background that you can see there of Silvia. Silvia really is a great representative for the UN because she was born in Argentina, lived and studied and worked in England, Israel, Hungary and Switzerland. She's a BA in Educational Theatre from Tel Aviv University and an MS in Professional Practice from the Institute of Health Sciences at the University of London. It really is a pleasure to welcome you today, Silvia, and we've known each other for many years, and I hope that relationship that we have will continue for many to come. So I hand the floor over to you to make some introductory and opening remarks around your discussion today. And I look forward to everyone participating in the question and answer period by posting your comments and notes into the chat function. So over to you, Silvia.
Thank you, Greg, for this great introduction, and thank you, IFA, for inviting me. I feel humbled, especially because I know that among you there are several advocates and you know, older than me and more experienced than me sometimes. But what I do like to bring here is the connection between what happens at the global level and at the national level, and things that I have gathered in these 20 years in Geneva. And before I go into practical pointers of what really I believe that it takes to be an advocate, I think I would like to say what I advocate for. And I advocate for the human rights of older people. And I want also to make the link, not only that the global and national level are very much connected, but also that human rights are not something abstract. Sometimes people that is something up there and amorphous without any form. And in fact, human rights are concrete obligations that member states have to protect. I mean, they have obligations, the member states fall into main three categories: to respect, that means that they, governments themselves, have to be, they must not violate the rights of people. They have the obligation to protect. So that means that states must prevent human rights violation by others, including individuals, corporations, and other organizations, such as institutions, for example, or long-term care institutions in this specific period, and obligation to fulfill. That means that they have to take positive action to ensure the full enjoyment of human rights. During the COVID-19, it's sad to notice that actually governments have failed older persons and other groups, and in all three categories. Older persons have been particularly affected by COVID-19, as we have seen in this town hall series on that we discuss different aspects, but really older persons have been discriminated. Discrimination was experienced in the triage, in refusing admission to hospitals, in stopping other vital treatments and services, and stricter lockdown rules based on discriminatory and arbitrary age limits. We saw shocking media reports of institutions that were abandoned, leaving their old residents to die, or we had to listen to patronizing, discriminatory language used in the media and everywhere, even by friends or people in the streets. It's not just the virus that is killing us. It's clear that it is the isolation, the neglect, and the rampant ageism that is killing us. And but then we had condemnations from the media as well, scholars and the UN agencies, including the Secretary Policy briefing of the 1st of May, and gave the impression that things would change. Many countries have been experiencing some levels of normalization, but in many, the strict rules and exclusion of older persons, especially those in institutions, still stand. Nursing homes, again, and especially with the fears of the second wave or the virus not going away, or still for over 6 months in some places, nursing homes do not allow family visits, and seems sometimes that our invisibility and exclusion, it is increasing. So things will not change unless we are active participants in the change. But what can we do? Who can help us? How can we make our case heard? And again, how can we defend our human rights at the national, regional, and international level? So as I said, these levels are connected. And sometimes it seems that the UN is in an ivory tower up there, but whatever happens at the UN and at the international human rights mechanisms do have an impact in what happens in the country. So what I would like to say is, I would like to talk a bit what institutions you can talk to at the national level to understand more how human rights, or what are your rights, understanding a little bit about the human rights mechanisms, and then mention, and with a few characteristics that we need in order to make that change happen, or to be more effective advocates. So at the national level, I would like to mention here the national human rights institutions. This is state-based. I mean, the states created institutions, but they are independent. And they act in a way of mediators, in many cases, between civil society and governments. They are observers of the governments to make sure that the governments comply with their human rights obligations. And there are different types of human rights institutions. There are the ombudspersons, there are research institutes that they focus on researching the human rights, and there are hybrid institutions and commissions of human rights that we have seen recently, the commission in Australia dealing with discrimination against older persons, or the situation of elder abuse in institutions. So there are different ways, but they are always there, and not in all countries, but in many, they are always there to make that link. And this is a very concrete place where we can go to get information about what our rights are and how they can help. Sometimes they can intervene, or sometimes they can help us in submitting a complaint. And they are also very active in the international and the regional human rights mechanisms. So what are they? So the CSOs, I say civil society, can work with both the human rights institutions, national human rights institutions, and they can work with the governments, and they can work with the human rights mechanisms at the UN level. And just to make a little picture of what those mechanisms are, before I can say what we can do at them, I will ask Andra to put that one slide, that you can see that there are, at the UN, you have the charter-based human rights mechanisms, which are the Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council meets 10 weeks a year in 3 sessions, March, June, July, September. In fact, in September, the rights of older persons is on the agenda of the Human Rights Council. Then there are universal periodic review. Each country is reviewed by peers, that means by other countries, and reviewing how they comply with human rights obligations. Civil society, NGOs can participate, can submit reports. You can check when your country is under investigation or under review, excuse me, under review, and then you can send a shadow report, and you can listen. Some of them, the sessions are public. You can even view how your government replies to the questions proposed by the Troika, or the other three governments that are asking the questions. You can even propose questions that the governments that are asking those, that ask those questions. And there are a few governments that keep asking questions about older persons, but not many. And very little is discussed about older persons in these reviews. So it is our role to make sure that older persons come up as one important human rights issue discussed when they are reviewed. Then there are the special procedures, which are the special rapporteurs or the independent expert that we know that we are lucky to have an independent expert on the rights of older persons. And Rosita Confel-Mate just finished her mandate in last April, and Claudia Mahler, who may be among you today, started her mandate in May. This is very important for us because not only writes thematic reports that are presented to the Human Rights Council in September, and we can engage in that dialogue. That means we can submit questions or make a written statement or an oral statement during the dialogue between the special rapporteur or the independent expert and the government, and make our call during the session where all the members of the Human Rights Council and other observers are there. Then we have other special procedures that also have their time of dialogues at the Human Rights Council. And all of them in normal times have country visits. And I say normal times because since COVID-19 started, all country visits were canceled. But we hope that times will normalize somewhat in this regard, because country visits are a very important tool. When the special rapporteur or the independent expert visits a country and observes how human rights of older persons are observed or not, and meets with the different stakeholders. And older persons are among, obviously, the stakeholders. But what I call as well, and I advocate for, is that when other special rapporteurs come to your countries, as well, that they make sure that their stakeholders also include older persons. For example, the special rapporteur on violence against women, they generally forget to include older women in their consultation with NGOs. Or the special rapporteur to health, to make sure that older persons are also in the consultations, because they are obliged to meet with NGOs as well as with different ministers and different stakeholders that they will identify. So we have to engage not just with our independent expert, but make sure that we are not forgotten by the others. And this you will see at the end, Andra will post afterwards in the IFA website, resources. And when you go to the links on the Office of the High Commissioner, always you will have the calendar of what countries the different special mandates have visited and what countries they are going to visit. And lastly, there is the treaty bodies. Treaty bodies are the bodies of the committees that follow the implementation of different conventions and treaties. And this is where a new convention on the rights of older persons would fall into that category of treaty bodies. But the fact that we still don't have a convention, and I believe that eventually we will have one, that doesn't mean that we cannot engage with the conventions and the committees that exist. And again, in the committees, they evaluate the implementation of the specific convention by the different countries in a regular periodic base. Every 4 or 5 years, countries go and they are evaluated by a committee that is formed by independent experts. So it's not peers like the Universal Periodic Review. This is a committee of experts. And they always have generally 2 meetings with civil society, one at the beginning of the committee and one at the end of the committee. And there are meetings with society, with NGOs, sometimes are countries that bring older people in their delegations. For example, the UK, when they come to the meetings of CEDAW, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, there are advocates that advocate for older women in the delegation of advocates for the rights of women that come to CEDAW. So I think that we can be more active in that regard. And as I said, and this is very important, that our participation of civil society, knowing the limitations and the regulations, because not every NGO, one has to be accredited, but it's not impossible to get accreditation. And if not, one gets together with other NGOs that do have accreditation to make sure that our concerns get there. So we can participate on the Human Rights Council by either be there in an oral statement or send a video statement during different dialogues, or with the special rapporteurs of our independent expert, or in the general dialogues or other panels. We can engage with our independent expert by submitting inputs when questionnaires, she poses questionnaires for a thematic report, or other special rapporteurs, when they publish questionnaires, do send your concerns or your experiences from your country. And we can also participate, as I said, in the treaty bodies, in the different committees, and we can always submit complaints. We can submit complaints to the different special rapporteurs, we can submit complaints with a committee, to a committee, or yes, I think those, and they are probably in, and the Human Rights Council as well, one can send complaints. So there are very important issues that we can do to make sure that we raise the visibility of older persons, because the situation at the moment is we do not use the system enough. Partly it's because we don't know how they work, and it's difficult, because partly it's because we know that the Office of the High Commissioner or other UN, older persons are not their priority, so they don't come to us with information, so we need to be active in looking for the information. And that's why I mentioned the National Human Rights Institution as a good starting point to understand, to get help in how to get to this, to use the system. Because again, as I said, unless we submit complaints or comments or questions or requests, nobody will do it for us. So then how do we do it? I mean, what do we need? I said the characteristics, and I don't know how long I've been talking to, but I will finish with a few points. And first, we need to know what is your goal. To advocate, you need to know what you're advocating for. So, and break into smaller objectives or tactical steps, because we know if I advocate for a convention, I know that I will not have a convention tomorrow. So what is it that are the smaller objectives, or how can I use the mechanisms that exist, or the calendar, and use opportunities to get closer to my goal? But we need to engage in a dialogue with the governments, those who are the ones who will eventually decide on the need of a convention and draft the text of a convention. And I'm saying this because it is important that we engage in dialogue while not giving up your objective. So we need to be listening. We need to know who your allies are and who your opponents are. We need to listen and know their arguments and understand where they come from, so we do not get stuck to only one message and shout it. We need to, again, understand and try to to convince them in a way, and in a way that they can listen to us and not create a rejection. And that's why I'm very insistent on the making friends. I said, I have many friends among you today. And I think that this is part of my work as an advocate, is to make friends with the representatives of the governments. And we have coffees and lunches as well in normal times, but it's not just that. It's the way that I create trust, that they feel that they can also call me if they need advice on a text for a resolution or a panel. And we have to be prepared to help them. That means to provide language. And we are not supposed to know everything, because nobody can know everything. But we as advocates can actually look for those who know, to those experts, and make the connection with the governments. So we are catalyzers and networkers. We make sure that the message comes from those who have the knowledge to those who need it to make the implementation. We need to help them, to give them the ideas of what a good policy is and what a bad policy is, that they cannot have a good policy unless they have our participation, that we participate in the design and the discussions around any policy that the government is implementing. But the same is regarding resolutions at the global level or on the regional level. I also said, and look for those common points, even when we have, and this is part of the principle of the UN, and that's why sometimes it's so frustrating, and it is frustrating. It feels sometimes we step forward and 2 or 3 backwards. But we need to know and keep the big picture in mind, that there are step backs. We need to know that there are step backs. So we should not get too excited when something good happens. We need to acknowledge and tap a little bit our back when something good does happen, but knowing that there will be step backs. And always find what are the points of consensus, because that's how the UN mostly works. It works and things move slowly, because generally the things that will be easier to implement are those resolutions or documents that are adopted by consensus, that we can find what are the points that everybody agrees upon. So if there are very contentious issues, probably it will not be an idea to carry on insisting on something that it will not be adopted. We really need to move a step at a time sometimes, but knowing, really finding again, and I come back to the dialogue, contact, ask for help, know your national laws, know the system. I mean, use those links to learn how the system works. In the information that you are going to get in those links, there are several handbooks and manuals on how to navigate those international human rights mechanisms, and also links to the national human rights institutions, so you can know who your contact details are in your countries, and always ask for help if you think you need it, and you will get it. And then join other NGOs, join organizations. Do join GAROP, the Global Alliance on the Rights of Older People. I think the more we are, the more we will be able to convince our governments to engage at least in the discussions towards a convention at the open-ended working group that meets in normal times once a year at the UN in New York. And also support other human rights, because human rights are human rights for everybody. So if I want to protect the rights of older persons, I need also to support the rights of women. I need to support the rights of the child. I need to support the right of LGBTI. I need to support the rights of persons with disabilities. I need to work with them and support them. And that's how I get their support when we advocate for our resolutions. And that's what the special mandates do. They work together as well, supporting each other, because otherwise we will be alone, and we don't want that. And also understanding that everybody gets old. And follow your country's human rights reports, and follow your country's and provide the reports, shadow reports. Yes, I've been told that I wasn't looking at the camera, and I apologize for that. I was looking at the people, and they are not. As I said, help your governments and connect people, connect ministry, connect the agencies, the UN agencies sometimes, believe me, they do call the NGOs to know what is happening in the other agency. And we can do it. I find that part of our advocacy role is really to get the overall picture and make sure that they connect with each other. And I think I will leave it there, and probably I spoke too much. And I want
Silvia, you definitely haven't spoken too much, and we've heard from a very passionate person who believes very strongly around rights. So thank you for your very powerful presentation today, and I know lots of people will take messages that you've presented away with them for their work. It's been really interesting, particularly in the time of COVID-19, when you raise the issue of discriminatory language and ageism, particularly in situations of COVID, and the impact that COVID's had on older people, and which has highlighted ageism, inappropriate language or discriminatory language. And I think for us, when as organisations and individuals, when we see those things, we need to really stand up and have a strong voice that these things are not appropriate, and that just because we have a pandemic, it impacts everyone, and there's no need for language like has been shown over the last 6 months. A couple of questions came in from people prior to the town hall being presented, and it came through from Oscar Bravo from the National Centre of Volunteers in Peru. And his question was, what can older people do to defend their rights? And the second question came through from Kevin Misinga, Age and Health Network in Cameroon. And that was, what can caregivers do to advocate for their loved ones when there are very limited resources? And I'm assuming it's because there are limited resources in Cameroon. So what are some of the things that can be done to respond to those two questions, do you think?
I think that one important point, and is what I mentioned, ask for help. I would start and check whether in your country there is a national human rights institution or ombudsperson. In Peru, in fact, they do, and I'm sure that Oscar knows that there is a Defensor del Pueblo, which is a defender of the people, and they act as really a good mediators. But also, the point of Oscar makes is, in order to defend our rights, we need to be active ourselves. We cannot wait for others to do it for us. We can do it with others, but we need to do it. So the first point is to know what our rights are. And that's why I insist on this, on the human rights or your legislation, because sometimes we don't get things and we don't know that we should. So the first point is know what your rights are. Advocate for the inclusion of older persons. Don't accept to be excluded. Don't accept just to be in lockdown without any reasonable reason. So that will be my first point. And I think it's a similar point to Cameroon. I know how difficult it is for family caregivers to know how to navigate the system to get the basic services that may exist or may not exist. And I don't think it's an issue necessarily of resources. It's, of course, resources are important, but sometimes are really an issue of will, of knowing where to go for help and how to ask for help. And I'm sure that there are a lot of, I know, in fact, that in Cameroon, there are civil society groups that also work with older persons. And I think that getting together with groups of older persons, it will also be easier to advocate your own government rather than do on one. If it's an individual issue, really go to a mediator or an ombudsperson or even social worker, but go together with with groups, NGOs that represent older persons, and I think that they will probably have the information to help you to navigate your own national system.
Thank you, Silvia. I know some questions are coming in from in the chat box, so I'll go to a couple of people just because they've raised some questions and asked you to respond to them a little. I'll ask the IFA rep, the UN, Cynthia Stewart, to the question and comments that she had, and then also Bridget Sleep, if you're able to talk a little bit about the question that you had for Silvia. So Cynthia and then Bridget.
Thank you so much, Silvia. This is really energizing. But I was remembering, and I can't remember exactly what year the National Human Rights Institutes actually were invited to attend the open-ended working group on aging, but a few years ago. And whether or not, from your perspective, you've seen any examples of how that has made a difference, and whether there are any strategies that have worked well with inclusion of the National Human Rights Institutes that we might proactively address.
And Bridget, your question?
Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you, Silvia, as well. My question was around a number of us on this call we're members of different alliances and networks and coalitions. So how can we better ensure the self-representation, the self-advocacy and the leadership of older people themselves in these networks and alliances that we do our advocacy through? Thank you.
Yes, okay. I will start with Cynthia, so I think it's easier. Thank you, Cynthia and Bridget. I think there is no doubt on the added value that the national human rights institutions bring to the process. And in fact, I think we should be proud. I think the Open-Ended Working Group is the first body in New York that really opened its doors to the national human rights institutions. And you do see more and more national institutions coming to New York to the meetings. You do see there is a working group on the rights of older people that is active, and they do interact on the rights of older people. And it is not easy for them either, because many don't even know much about older persons. So again, that link between the civil society and them to make sure that they include older persons in their dialogues or in their observation of governments, I think is key. And as I said, it's a good place to start when you don't know, when we don't have other institutions that can help us on the rights of older people. So I would say it's still new that they are part of the group, and I think it's only a positive step, and I do see them as full partners in the process. And Bridget, and that is a very good question, and how, and part of it is, I think, we talk about ageism, and I think we need to recognize that there is also self-ageism, that we also tend to exclude ourselves. We say, oh, our times is past, let the young do the job. And I think that there is always place for everybody. And part of the issue is that many of us do not see ourselves as old. Many of us have many identities, and old may not be one of them. So I always mention this example when there was this meeting in Geneva of 20 years of Beijing, which was the Plan of Action on Discrimination Against Women, the Commission for Women. And I would say there were 700 women, mostly women, in the room, and probably 80% were older women advocating for young girls. And this is fine. The question is, how do we translate the fact that they can advocate for the rights of young girls, but also for themselves, for ourselves? And I think that this is what we need to work on. And I think that is related to the issue of raising the awareness that older persons are holders of rights like everybody else, and that we can carry on being leaders, because it's not true that there are no leaders. There are many old leaders, and we know that. The point is that they don't recognize themselves as leaders of older people. And I think that is part of how we promote, is by including. And I think that a lot has been done by including women and having slots reserved for women. I think that we need to do the same with older people. I think that also at the UN as well, there are gender friendly, disability friendly environments and accessible environments, but nobody talks about making sure that on a panel there has to be not only gender balance but also age balance. And I think that this is something that we can do by actively bringing in more and more older persons to the picture. I don't know if I answer your question, Bridget, but I think that we will find together the answer.
Yeah, we will absolutely all together find the answers to some of these complex questions and how we respond. I want to go to three more questions, and it'll be Ina Volker, who's raised a question. I'll ask Ina to come on, and then Deborah Egan, and then also Katherine Kline. So Ina, are you available?
Yes, I'm available.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. My question comes here from Germany, from the German National Association of Senior Citizens Organizations. And from our experience, it's very difficult sometimes to get people that work at the local level, let's say, with older people that really have the hands-on practical experience, to get them involved in these discussions, either at national level or even more difficult actually at international level. So I wondered if Silvia has any experiences from other countries that she could share with us so that we can replicate or learn and implement them here in Germany. Thank you.
Yeah.
Deborah? Silvia, we'll go to Deborah's question.
Hi, Silvia, thank you. I'm also interested in a more local perspective around the silence that many healthcare organizations have related to COVID policies that are presented by the government, and many individuals privately disagreeing with the policies, but not speaking out publicly as a voice in the debate and influencing public policy, and is there any possibility of influencing that?
Yep. Okay. And Katherine? You're on mute, Katherine.
Trying to be good about not interrupting anyone else, or you're hearing my whiny cat. My question is really related to what you've all talked about, and it seems to me if it doesn't exist, we need to create a database of organizations like yours, Ina, so that we can be able to more fully coordinate what we're doing. We, each of us, have our own databases, our own organizations, our own individual contacts, but it seems to me there should be some neutral place. And the persons with disabilities found that it was awkward having one organization hold it. So without talking to poor Amal, who's already overworked at the UN, but perhaps suggesting that we could collaborate somehow and just create some kind of a database that she could have as that wonderful neutral advocate source, where we could feed in information, not undercutting our own abilities to do our own work, but to work collaboratively so we have that common international and local voice. Thank you.
Okay. My turn?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, first Ina. Germany is not the only country, and we know there are many countries, and we do know arguments that many, as I said before, the issue of identity, that older persons do not see themselves as old, or that they are separate from the rest of the citizens, and which is true. We are citizens like every other citizens, and we do not have any specific different rights. The point comes when our rights are violated simply because we are old. And I think that COVID-19 has been a really an amplifier of the discrimination that we suffer every day. And we really need to use it to bring people to the table, to understand that what we are talking about is about how to defend our rights that are very easily violated. I mean, it takes like that to violate. One is because we don't have specific legislation that protects against discrimination against older persons. And secondly, as I said, because they are not aligned in groups, in a group that organize, that together they can advocate for what we believe. And as I agree, is difficult. And I think it's more difficult probably in countries where there is, like in Germany, there is access to other human rights mechanisms in your country or in Europe. So people find it more difficult in a way to identify with older persons groups. But as I said, I think that we have to make the case with COVID-19. Yeah. We have to bring the examples and to the discrimination that is rampant during these times, and convince that we need a discussion not to separate ourselves from the other groups, but to work together with the other groups. And that brings me to the question by Deborah, how to influence. And I agree with you that many people, as I said before, say, oh, my time is past, or people are afraid of speaking up on their own. And that is the importance of the group. That is why it's so important to be part of a group that is not the individual speaking up, is the group of organizations or a group of individuals speaking up, and then using allies. And as I said, the media can be discriminatory, but they can also be your big ally. So you need to work with journalists that can bring the message through. You need to find your advocates from other groups that will find really, and this happened a lot with women's group or persons with disabilities, that we are working together because we realize that we are in the same boat. So it's finding those people that maybe already have an access to the decision makers and work with them. And so that's why I'm saying it's not about shouting, it's about navigating the system to make sure that the voice is heard by those that need to hear it. And that implies really working with others. And others can be from many different fronts, but okay. And also social media, somebody wrote, why not social media? Of course, when I talk about media, I mean the traditional media, but I also mean the social media that we can use. However, in social media, we tend to be friends and see our allies only. So the importance of working with the traditional media is that the message goes further afield, so further away from our circle. And that is very important to engage in a proper discussion. And Kathy, a database, yes, you're absolutely right, we need one. But I think that the decade of healthy aging will provide us with a platform where it will be inclusive. And I don't want to say much because I don't want to take from what is coming and the launch that that will happen in October. But I think that we will have an opportunity to have a common platform where everybody can input information and resources and services that can be used by everyone. So this is an example of how we can, the importance of linking between the different organizations to make sure that we bring the human rights approach and the participation of older persons in the other processes. And I think that Decade can provide such a platform.
Thank you, Silvia, and thank you for those questions. I know many people that are on this call probably have got lots of questions for you and comments, but I was wanting to particularly call on Claudia Mahler, if you're here, Claudia, just to because you're always populating the comments and notes field. So any thoughts and comments that you have around particularly this advocacy issue?
Thank you, Greg, for giving me the floor. I think Silvia showed the whole picture, and I just want to reach out to all of you. It would be good to reach out to me as independent expert to tell me, you know, what you want to hear also in the Human Rights Council, what you want to hear as new topics, and also to get engaged with me when country visits are, when we can have more country visits. Nobody knows when we can start again. Hopefully it is in February. And because I also would love to speak with my other hat, because I'm part of a national human rights institution, and I want to encourage you to reach out to your national institution and also work on the national level to get engaged with government, with other civil society actors, and to link, you know, the UN and the national level, which is key, because you can be sure that most of the national governments are not aware what's going on the international level. Even if they're working, you know, in government, in ministries which are working on policies on older persons, they are not aware what's going on at the UN level, because they are mostly the ministries of foreign affairs available for us to discuss this issue. So it is one task you can have to link also the national and international level on the governmental side, because they also don't speak with each other, and get together with NHRIs, because they are used to bridge those gaps. And maybe also you can have some kind of follow-up to the concluding observations, which are the recommendations which Silvia mentioned of the treaty bodies. It might be useful to, you know, come back to the government and have a follow-up and tell them, you know, there is still an implementation gap you have to close in this regard. And then it might be one little step further to a new convention, because they would see that there are gaps not only on the implementation level, but also on the normative level. Thank you for giving me the floor, and I would love to encourage you to get in touch with the mandate.
All right, thank you, Claudia. It's great to have you online, and there's many people here that have probably got lots of questions and would like to connect with you. So thank you very much. The information will be posted on the website, and the stuff from the chat function, and any links and resources. So I'd really encourage people to look at those once those information is posted, and to share the Facebook Live post once it's done, and this link with your friends and colleagues. Silvia, as we sort of wrap up, what would be some of the takeaway messages, particularly in the time of COVID-19, and it's been really difficult for many older people in many countries and the organisations that represent them, particularly in lockdown. What would be the takeaway message to improve advocacy around older people that you'd like to leave us with today?
Yes, I think first of all, know your rights. Know when they are being violated. Learn about your legislation. Learn about the system. In order to really advocate effectively, you need to know where you are working. So the first point then is really improve your knowledge base. That would be the first big takeaway. Secondly is, as I said, look for allies beyond your comfort zone. Be ready to change the course of the discussion. That means don't get, as I said, don't get stuck on one message. Try to approach from a different angle in order to make your opponents as well listen. And the third is don't give up. Don't get discouraged by the multiple step backs, and because there will be when there is a good moment. I mean, I have multiple times said, why, what do I need this for? It's so frustrating. But then you have a moment of some little success, and that gives you more energy to go on. Because I think that, as I always say, it's not just for us, it is for as well, not only for us, it is also for our children, our grandchildren. We are advocating for the rights of older people today, for all generations to come, that they can age in dignity. And I think that's, that is the message, and that's why hanging there.
Yeah, look, I think it's really fascinating when we see where we've come from over the last 6 months around COVID-19, when the most infected were people over the age of 70. And clearly what's happened in recent months is older people really have got the message how bad this pandemic is and how it can impact their life. To the extent now where the smallest number of infections of people getting COVID-19 are in people over the age of 60. The biggest cohort now is people under the age of 40 in terms of being infected with COVID-19. So, you know, all of us have a role to play, particularly around advocacy and sending out the right message to all cohorts that this is a pandemic. There is no magic bullet at the end of the tunnel yet, although things are promising with some vaccines. But whether we have something before next year, early next year, we still don't know.